Good afternoon. I assume it's afternoon at this point. It's 12 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're going to walk through the FEMA regulations that the city enforces along with our own floodplain management processes. So our agenda today is going to be the overview for the NFIP and the community service rating. It'll be the FEMA map changes that occurred with the city of Tampa earlier this year in 2021, and then our ordinance that we just adopted in March to go along with those new maps. So with that, we'll start going on. The city of Tampa is a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program, affectionately called the NFIP. Everybody loves those acronyms and have letters for things. It provides flood insurance availability for everyone that lives within a participating municipality or county or municipalities, local or counties. It provides flood insurance for homes and businesses that have guaranteed mortgages that are done through or backed by the actual government. The city's first flood insurance rate maps were adopted and were being used back in 1980, and the city joined the NFIP program in 1991. So it's been 30 some years of active work within the municipality for the National Flood Insurance Program. The community rating system is a voluntary program within the NFIP, which goes through a lot of practices for floodplain management. It goes with buildings, designs, but it also goes through stormwater quality and stormwater issues that provide discharge into bodies of water for water quality. So our participation in it is twofold. You have the vertical built element, and then you have the horizontal flood issues and stormwater retention issues. NOCRS Communities Flood Insurance Program rates do receive discounts based upon the increased community's participation in the program. Some of the goals of the programs to reduce or avoid flood damage in properties, strengthen and support the insurance aspect with outreach, and to foster comprehensive floodplain management through a dedicated ordinance that the state of Florida recognizes for the community. Participating counties and municipalities are stronger, more resilient on reducing flood actions. We use the best practices as part of the program for the community rating system. We adopt a flood management ordinance. Ours, the city's, is a little stricter, a little higher standards, as is most municipalities throughout the state of Florida, for obvious reasons, which includes higher freeboards, limitations, limiting substantial damage ratios. The responsibilities that the building code and the practices have is to ensure that there's a minimum. There is always a minimum or baseline as a participant in the community rating system, but you can also build up a higher standard and adopt standards that assist in keeping mitigation or insurance premiums in our community in a better position for reduced rates. We do enforce a more rigorous building and stormwater codes in the city of Tampa based upon our participation, and our outreach has been a participant in that CRS since 1991. Again, 30 years worth of activities for the city. So we've gotten pretty good at our rating and being proactive in making sure that our community is safe and is more resilient, just in case we do get a flood event of some magnitudes. Adopting higher standards in the Florida Building Code, there are a lot of requirements that go with our mitigation ordinance also. It gives us the ability to have written documents on how to enforce the code. As is any program that you can see, and FEMA is no different than any local. They can throw out numbers, and the numbers on the chart you see that post 2000 structures and the money saved by having reduced rates. Those are actual dollars, whether they're actually used because of an event or whether it's in reduced premiums. The state of Florida is the largest participant in the community service rating and NFIP. We have the most flood insurance premiums of any other state in the country. And Florida has been more than aggressive in its use of the higher standards and to protect not only property but also lives. When we're looking at adopting higher standards, the NFIP program, they have their own standards as a minimum, and that ordinance or that package that the community goes into an agreement with has minimums. Then our participation voluntarily in the community rating system gives us ability based on us meeting guidelines or exceeding those. They do provide reductions or discounts in how insurance rating is done for single family and for businesses. And the city of Tampa, we have just recently graduated into category 5, which gives a 25% reduction in the flood insurance premiums that all of our citizens get to take advantage of. We are, because of some things we've done that will show up later in the presentation, we are extremely close to getting to the next step of a category 4, which will give us a 30% reduction, which those dollars translate to a lot of reductions for our citizens in their home insurance ratings and flood insurance. We've got a short video that we're going to run. We've got 2 of these, one at this point, and then we've got one later. So just bear with us and we're going to run the video.
We moved to Washington, North Carolina because we wanted to move out of the Washington, D.C. metro area, just kind of trying to set up for retirement. So we purchased the house in January of 2018, and then we moved in the summer of 2018. And then within 3 months, we were dealing with a storm, Hurricane Florence. So as the storm approached, started to grow in strength, my wife and I both were concerned. We did choose to leave and went up to Richmond to stay with some family members. The house sat a lot lower than it currently does, roughly 2 feet off the ground. And when we finally did get back to the house, we were able to determine that, yes, the subfloor had been damaged, some of the foundation had been damaged, all the insulation below the house, all the mechanicals were damaged. Structurally, it was still in question, but there was some damage to the piers and foundation work. So I realized that, okay, we have experienced a flood, water damage. And the good news was I knew we had flood insurance. The claim didn't fully cover the damage. So at that point, I reached out to my insurance agent and he said, well, this is what they're going to pay. So I asked him about, okay, well, what other resources are available? Because I have additional damages that I feel need to be addressed. And my wife and I sat down, talked it over. We could have just took the money and just repaired the house as it sat and as it was. But we felt like, here in North Carolina, hurricanes are a big deal. They come every year and they seem to be getting stronger. And also the season seems to be getting longer. There's more frequent storms or larger number of storms per year. So we felt like, why not mitigate and protect the investment we made and do something about it? I reached out to my friend John, who works for FEMA as a building science engineer, who is an expert in both mitigation, building codes, and protection of property. John was kind enough to help me create a path and a timeline so I knew what I needed to do. FEMA has some resources that if you qualify, you can get some additional help other than just what's paid out from the initial claim. And so we had to make sure we met those criteria, which it did turn out as far as damage had to be 50% or greater of the market value at the time prior to the storm. So in doing so, I had to obtain several bids from local contractors to make sure I came up with that number and met the criteria. the insurance estimate was just below that threshold. So we did that. That got us kind of moving forward with the floodplain manager, who was able to write a letter, who then in turn passed that on to the insurance company, who then in turn passed that on to FEMA. Everybody signed off, dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and next thing I know, some funds became available. The FEMA resources were very helpful and insightful, gave me suggestions and ideas and information about how to not only build to today's codes, but even better and stronger to mitigate and protect the investment of the home. So what we did is we chose to raise the house. We wanted to elevate it enough to avoid having flood issues in the future. We did that, got it up high enough that even the mechanicals are safe under the house. Since we've raised it and got the foundation shored up, it's actually been great. It's done a great job. I haven't had any issues, any problems. We've had some heavy torrential rains, a little bit of flooding. I'm much more confident that it'll be fine because of the steps of mitigation and protection we have taken. So, you know, it was a lot of work, but at the end of the day, at the end of the project, it was very much well worth it. We were able to get up high enough and avoid future flood damage and sleep easy at night now.
Lost your slide. Stay with us.
We'll get to the next slide here.
There we go. That is a great segue into mapping and flood. It's important to know that those opportunities that are out there for elevating structures or flood proofing and protecting structures, FEMA does a great job on their website by providing that research. And if anybody on this presentation would like to have any information, I'll be happy to share our webpage and our information with it. But it's interesting that you have properties and people that want to lift their houses up, because that is an avenue, one, to keep your property safe, but it also lessens your requirements for flood insurance. Even though you still need to have flood insurance, it's just actuated at a different price because the structure is elevated and is not below the design flood elevation or the base flood elevation. So that was a nice video that we found that we wanted to share with you. Next. Starting back in 2018, FEMA started doing our local flood insurance study, redoing our mapping, doing new LIDAR, providing elevations to relook at our coastal floodplain mapping, not our riverine that we have in Hillsborough County in the Hillsborough River. But the flood insurance study started throughout the state in 2014, and they have gone from Jacksonville around the Horn and back up to us. Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, Temple Terrace, Pinellas County were the last groups in the state of Florida to get their insurance study done and completed. It was revised in 2018 with higher base flood elevations. It incorporated a new term that FEMA has come up with that is a coastal A, or is affectionately called the LMWA. It's a limit of moderate wave action delineation. And that line is a line that is between the velocity zone and an AE. It just has a lower base flood elevation attached to it. In the city of Tampa, we grew with the new study and the new mapping. Over 10,000 new properties were added to our current list of properties. Most of those are in the peninsula in Tampa. There were some that are along the river that got added. We do have links on our webpage along with FEMA's for the maps. Our webpage, as you see on the right-hand side, we have a full dedicated page for flood maps, for flood information, for how to do a flood with 50% rules. We have documents, we have instructions. We're pretty active in providing the services, even though we may not do as much community outreach so that people will get noticed of it. We do provide it in a web-based system. The new term that I spoke of a minute ago on the limited moderate wave action or activity limb wall, the coastal A, basically creates another degree of a velocity zone standards, and there are different types of enforcement of that line, and the city is, in the Tampa, has taken a more aggressive stance on how we enforce that line. And again, we'll go back to the reason being is it gave us a lot of additional points in our community service rating projection by enforcing the line as a velocity zone and just not a higher elevation. So with that, the limb wall line, as you see on the screen, it divides off the velocity zone that has wave heights greater than 3 feet. And then that new line is from the velocity zone line to what looks like a cold front line when you look at a map. It is 3 foot or less, up to 1.5 feet in the coastal areas. And then behind that line is your typical AE zone, where the wave action is much less, causes less damage because of the wave action. So in your velocity zone and in your coastal A, both of those require breakaway walls, a V-zone design certificate. We do require some scour reports and geotechnical reports on how to put in piers, piles, grade beams if needed, whether you can have a shallow foundation or whether the geotech tells you that it's got to be deeper. So in our floodplain management ordinance, we adopted the new maps in January of 2021. We are more stringent in our ordinance than some municipalities. Some we are not nearly as strict. Some along the actually open Gulf has some more strict activities on it. During our mapping of the flood, we had sent out 27,000 letters to properties that were either in it or about to fall within those. We held 3 open houses in conjunction with Hillsborough County, all of which were at the Jan Platt Library down off of Manhattan. And there were over 500 people that came into those meetings to discuss the new maps, insurance requirements. FEMA was there, and I know that shocks a lot of people, but FEMA actually had representatives there to discuss the maps along with the municipalities. Inside that base flood elevation that we adopted, they are higher. Some are more drastically higher around the bay, the open bay area. Some are 1 foot or 2 foot higher, but we did adopt a new ordinance that we were required to redraft with the new maps coming in. And we adopted that through City Council on March 15th of this year. And we also provided additional amendments to the Florida Building Code and to ASC 24 that made it a little stricter or changed the language from the building code. We did that through local amendments. So the definition of the limb wall or the coastal A, as outlined as a picture on the map, it is really, everybody watches weather all the time, that triangular line that's dark and black is the new limb wall line, and it points in the direction of water or the velocity zone. So it is behind a AE line, but it adopts the higher elevations and the requirements for wave actions. And anywhere you see a velocity zone line, a VE line on a map, there will be in the city of Tampa an additional coastal A line right behind that. In our administrative amendments to the Florida Building Code, we made changes to our requirements for in Chapter 5.111 for declaration of land restrictions of non-conversion agreement per se for commercial and residentials. When you have enclosures, and that term is an enclosure in the terms of even a garage is considered enclosure, that we require people now to perform a declaration of land restrictions, a non-conversion agreement and have it recorded so that it travels with the property. So any future buyers know that there is a piece that is beneath the base flood elevation and that it cannot be changed or created into any kind of habitable space or divided up. And our form kind of lays that out, and it's about it's a one pager, but it has some bullet points on it, 7 of them. And then we will fill out the document, and then you actually have it notarized, and then you record it with the clerk of the circuit court so that it travels with any property searches. Part of our this declaration provides for inspections. The city is given through that document the ability to perform inspections of that property, and also the city is required to perform inspections on all construction and alterations, whether it's substantial improvement or non-substantial improvement. We're required to halt construction of new construction vertically until an elevation certificate is provided as under construction, so that once the finished floor is established, an elevation certificate is required to be provided to the city to verify that you meet the design flood elevation and per the plans. This protects not only the city, but also protects property owners to make sure that their property is being built and there's not an oops or surprise at the end of the construction where now the finished floor is below the design flood elevation, and now you get to either lift the structure, and in some cases we had in the past structures that were built incorrectly and did not provide an elevation certificate until the end, was below the design flood elevation, and they ended up demolishing a $800,000 house because it was built too low and they could not pass inspections nor receive insurance from the NFIP. One of the other terms that we changed as an amendment was the explanation and definition of substantial damage and substantial improvement. Our substantial damage, we included 2 separate events or occasions during a 10-year period, and we added the percentage as 25% of the market value. That would deem the structure to be substantially damaged during an event. Substantial improvement, we included a combination of any repairs, reconstruction, renovations, and we also added the 1-year window. It's considered a 1-year cumulative cost. So at any point in time when permits are pulled until they are finalized, you have 1 year from that final inspection that price of improvement will go towards any future request to do improvements to the structure. So you could have properties that are running for different projects, and we will add on additional permits that were pulled that have not reached their 1-year timeline, and it'd be added to the project for determination of substantial improvement. The big thing which I talked about with the non-enclosure or the non-conversion was a definition of enclosed areas below the design flood. We've added in the language that enclosed area cannot be conditioned space, temperature controlled, whether that's heated or air conditioned. It cannot be finished or partitioned into anything except for storage area, access through a stairwell, a ramp or elevator. There are different requirements on elevators through the flood ordinance. And that area cannot be more than 100 square feet and no more than 6 foot wide in one direction, one dimension. So we have limited those abilities to enclose those areas. And that was a single move that got us about 100 additional points in changing the enclosure and requiring a non-conversion agreement. We do require at the top of the stairwell entering from the rear or from below, whether it's in a velocity zone, a VE or a AE, we do require an exterior door that is rated as exterior at the top of the stairs, and that stair to be sealed from the envelope above. The requirements for the condition space and the foundation design we included in 511-246 to include some additional items that meant we had to explain the construction of decks, pools, walkways, things that need to be structurally independent and not within or underneath the structures being built. Those are always typically things that we have conversations about. If a structure is elevated, can we put a pad or a slab underneath for parking, which you can. It just has to be scored, and it has to be frangible to the point where it can be destroyed, moved without destroying the nature of the structure. And we also do not allow any fill in a velocity zone. So we cannot fill underneath the structure to put pads or a garage underneath it. One of the determining factors for a substantial improvement or damage is we have different cost approaches that we use for determining it. It can be the market value or the depreciated value that our tax assessors provides us online. And you can find that on the Hillsborough County tax assessor's website. It'll give you a depreciated value of just the structure, not including land. But you can also acquire private appraisals. Those private appraisals have to be written a certain way, and we have some journal white papers that were written that we can provide, and they're online that you can look at if you have an appraisal coming through that helps with how the appraisal has to be written. It cannot be comparative cost comparisons of the properties. It has to be cost of the structure and its replacement value, which is much lower. We also use, instead of, and this is a sad thing to say, but we did have people that would lie on the cost of an improvement. Their best friend can get them plywood for $1.50 a sheet, and that's what we're getting. We have stopped that with the new ordinance we are using the ICC building valuation tables by a cost per foot for improvements in construction. And you can find that on our website or on the ICC SAFE website. You just need to use the current building valuation table, which the most recent one was done in August. And that table looks like this is a screenshot. The U classification is a miscellaneous that you can use for the alterations based upon your construction type. Majority of all single families are using it as a type 5B, which is all the way out to the right. In today's table, that cost is $59.88 a square foot. Now, granted, that is not what a contractor is charging. That's probably not real actual value, but we found that it's a better representative of costs than trying to do a detailed contract, because the state of Florida does not allow municipalities to request contracts to be given to them to do work on property. So this was one of the driving factors to just use the building valuation tables. When we were talking about conditioned space in this plan, this was actually one that we had just reviewed not too long ago. In the blue hatched area off to the right, they were using a large landing area or room down below to house their elevator and their stairwell, and it was open to the stairs above, to the next two floors above, so that the air conditioned space came all the way down to that ground floor. And that is not something that is allowed by the ordinance. It cannot be directly or indirectly conditioned. And we use the word conditioned because that covers whether that's heat or cooled. You would have to limit the space, which we did in this case, and they put a lid on that stairwell on the ceiling level of the ground floor so that it was the floor of the first floor living area, and then provided a door at the top of that stairwell to then seal off this lower level. And they actually had to remove part of that wall and the door next to the lift so that it was an open space and it wasn't partitioned off. The inspections I spoke about earlier, The agreement that is signed and travels with the property does give the city the ability to enter the structure at reasonable times upon request, to inspect the area to make sure it has not been partitioned, that there's been no changes to that area. The city gets some major points for this, for having the ability to do an inspection. The city does not want to go around on all of our properties and do those inspections, but we do have the ability to go in and do those. FEMA does do during their 3-year cycle review and audit us on how we're doing. They will go around to properties and put in violations if they see things have been changed, and then put us on notice to then go out and cite the property and get them corrected. So we do have the ability to inspect those buildings that have the enclosed areas below the lowest floor. This change on accessory structures came through the state about 1.5 years ago. We incorporated in our ordinance that limits accessory structures within any flood area, whether it's an AE zone or a velocity. In special flood hazard areas, if the accessory structure is, and this is a key component, is below, the finished floor is below the base flood elevation, the design flood elevation, you have limits of 600 square feet on accessory structure. If it is below the base flood elevation, that area cannot be used for anything except for storage, parking, or access. It cannot be a pool house or a TV room or a mother-in-law suite below the base flood. In a coastal A and a velocity zone, since we consider them one and the same, those structures that are below the base flood elevation are limited to 100 square feet in size. They have to be anchored. They have to resist lateral movement as you typically would do. All the materials being used on an accessory structure or anything below the base flood has limitations on the materials being used. They have to be flood damage resistant, and we'll get to that in a coming slide. But that is a key component, that it's flood resistant and not just pressure treated. The materials being used, when you look at the FEMA bulletins and the materials in a class 4, class 5, there are requirements that pressure treatment, or the PT, is a general term used, and are not necessarily preservative chemicals that are being used. Pressure treated lumber does not qualify as preservative, and those chemicals have to be provided on a form, and it's on the next slide, on what a preservative treated wood is. And there are specifics on that material, how it's used, where it can be used, and what that chemical is used to impregnate the wood. Next. And this is the U121, which is the Wood Products of America's design. This is on the FEMA website and in some technical bulletins. It limits the ability of woods that are used and in what locations, whether they're structural or whether they're just coverings, plywood or marine grade. All of those materials are much different. And I know in the past, the city accepted the word PT, pressure treated, on their plans. We are not any longer, since the ordinance was written in March, taking those. We actually require it to be called out what type of wood or what kind of treatments that you're actually using if it's below the design flood elevation. One of the items that continues to pop up on our reviews on items below the design flood elevation are floor outlets and recessed showers in the structures. If there is a recessed shower, that recessed area becomes your lowest area, and that area has to be above the DFE. Same thing with your floor outlets. Excuse me. And it's also on areas that are below the design flood elevation. We're requiring all the outlets, switches, all those materials to be above the design flood elevation, which many designers are starting to come up with remote control switches to turn lighting on below the structure in a garage, or ceiling fans that are above. So there are some products out there that can assist with switches and outlets that aren't allowed to be below the design flood elevation. What's at stake? This is always the key point that we get to when you ask questions about why is this required or why is FEMA requiring it. And what's at stake? The builders, the loss of revenues and additional cost of construction. Those are always items that are at stake, that are the pocketbook. Property owners lose revenue. They're displaced from the property when there is an event if they're not constructed correctly. The community loses ratings. It makes us the ability to have flood insurance. Hillsborough County a few years back in 2008 lost their ability to write flood insurance for a period of time because they did not provide a new ordinance to go with their flood community. So part of our rating, we do not want to lose our rating system. We do not want to lose participation in the NFIP, and all of those things could happen to the city if we are not enforcing our regulations or the National Flood Insurance Program's regulations. We can be put on notice and we can lose the ability to allow for insurance to be written for all of our community residents that live within a flood-prone area. We have one more video for you, and it's not too long, if you just bear with us. It's not liking you.
It's not liking me.
Give us a second.
My patients here are the most amazing humans that you would
can't see the video?
No, we can't see the video. Oh, there we go.
like no.
Yes.
And we're gonna,
I can't wait for the day that I get to look at somebody and say that you're cured.
Cancer treatment is a long haul.
give us a second.
It's stuck, sorry. Okay, I guess what was.
We'll just skip the video. We'll just skip the video.
I'll skip that one.
Our final notes, and I'm open to have questions after this. Our project and our processes, we are in line with FEMA, state, City of Tampa requirements and standards. We are always available to assist the documents, how the flood insurance reports were done, keeping updated with new conditions, new designs. And you guys as architects always have options and designs that are new and progressive, and we're always open to that. We do have online LOMARs and LOMAs, which are letters of map revisions or conditions if the properties have received one through FEMA. The rate maps are out there and available to you. We're available at any point in time to meet with people or designers to go through a project or a design to get input. Most of these inputs that we're doing right now are to the areas below the design flow elevation and how big they can be and how they can be protected. We're always open for the general public to help people with measures on how to protect their property, along with FEMA's guidances on the building science resource areas. We do have elevation certificates that are available on request for properties that have provided them. If we don't have them on our system to provide to an applicant or a designer, they would have to be performed by a licensed surveyor to prepare a new elevation certificate for their use if they need those. Our participation with the NFIP, next screen. We are part of the lower right. We are part of what FEMA calls Region 4, which takes up the southeast. It's quite large. I don't get very many conversations with David. He's a very busy man. But there are two people on the screen right now that are available to discuss items or concerns through FEMA. And they are our direct contacts at Region 4 to get input or get concerns for. And our resources that we have that we use is FEMA.gov, the technical bulletins, fact sheets, publications, the viewers that they have. We have our CFM certifications as City of Tampa. We have 12 CFMs on staff that can help at any point in time and discuss things. There is a library and CRS resources. As you see on the right, we do use the flood resistant design construction from the ASC 2414. But granted, our local ordinance is stricter than a lot of these. So even though you may see a technical bulletin or see something in the ASC book, you do need to check with our local ordinance to see whether we've incorporated a higher standard or requirement in those. So just keep our website as a handy tool to actually do some look and some research and make us available to you at any point in time. I think the next slide is just a question and answer slide. Does anyone have any questions that I'm happy to answer?
Hey, David. I wanted to know if the slideshow would be available to send out to everybody who attended today. I've had a few people message me in the chat that they're interested.
Absolutely. We can make that available to you. We can send that to you. And we can also put it on our website under our flood stuff just to have it available too. But yeah, we will make that available so everyone can have a copy of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. I wasn't going to give you the canned answer that it's public record, but it is public record. Any questions?
It looks like there's a question in the chat. Somebody wants to know when will the code changes be in effect?
I'm sorry, when will the what?
When will the building code changes be in effect?
The building code changes will be, we just changed in 2020. So 2023 would be the next cycle for the Florida Building Code. Our local amendments to the Florida Building Code, they're in effect now. We had to have the building commission sign off on those when we did our ordinance back in March of 2021. Any other questions? I know that was a lot of material.
I see a couple in the chat.
Hi, Dave. I sent you a direct message. I was curious if it's allowable to enclose the entire bottom floor for a garage, and is there a limit on this area?
You can enclose the ground floor below a lifted or elevated structure. It would be the perimeter walls of the structure itself. And those walls, if it's in a velocity zone, would have to be breakaway with flood vents. If it's in an AE, you can have a garage down below the design flood elevation. You just have to have the ability to flood vent it on two walls to equalize pressure, hydraulic pressure inside the building. But you can have areas below the design flood elevation for a garage and for building access. Just remember that when you're doing something other than a parking area, it can't be larger than 100 square feet and it can't be wider than 6 feet. So your parking area could be the entire ground floor and have walls around it, but it cannot be subdivided out and it cannot be conditioned. We've actually had, as a little side note, we've had some people coming up with some pretty creative ways to air condition their garage below by putting in mini splits. And those cannot be hung on the walls, but they can be mobile down below and plugged in. But you cannot have air conditioning down there in a mini split that has venting through the wall.
Thanks for that, David. One last question on that was, if the stair goes to the floor, we understand you have to have a door on the first floor above base flood, but the staircase, if it's a scissor stair, it's clearly wider than 6 feet. Is that allowable?
Long as you leave it as an open stair, you can have 2 walls attached to it to hold support of the wall, but then the remaining area is open to that ground floor, that would be fine because it's not an enclosed area at that point. People get in trouble when they want to bring enclosure in and put a door so that it's not open to that garage area. But you can put a scissor stair in as long as it's open to that ground floor. It doesn't have a door leading into it. And you do have to have the flood resistant material to make sure. A lot of people in glossy zone areas are starting to put those in as concrete stairs versus trying to do any type of wood stairs or wood treated. Next question.
Can an owner build below flood and take all responsibility?
A builder, the next question was, can a builder or owner build below the design elevation, take responsibility? That is incorrect. You cannot do that. That is based upon our flood elevation or flood mitigation ordinance. It does not allow building below the design flood elevation, but only with certain uses. And that is a community system that we are part of the NFIP, and that those are not allowed, whether the owner wants to take responsibility or not. We do not allow that construction to be the habitable space below.
Some incentives of nature-based solutions with flood insurance rates. I'm not quite sure.
The question on benefits for nature-based on insurance rates. I'm not an insurance writer, thank God. But you could contact your insurance companies and ask if there's any incentives on your insurance rates by doing other things other than what's required by the local municipality.
Dehumidification.
That was part of the mini split, having dehumidification down there. You can have those devices if they are plug-in and mobile. If they are built into the structure, those are not allowed below the design flood elevation.
Elevator shafts.
Elevator shafts are allowed. Those are in a bulletin on how an elevator shaft is allowed to go down to the ground level. And there are requirements on how that shaft is done and is treated for water intrusion, along with switches that do not allow that elevator to go down to the ground floor during an event if you have flooding down to bottom level. So there are limitations on elevators, but there is a technical bulletin that you can look up to get all the particulars on how the elevator shafts are done. We're reading through the questions now for everybody. Is there another one?
How do we know the base flood elevation?
Oh, how do you know the base flood elevation? The flood maps are on the insurance rate maps, are on our website. They're done by panels. Those panels are encompassing areas of town. You can eventually, our GIS layer will have the ability for you to type in your address, pull up your piece of property, and see what your base flood elevation is. And in our locality, you are required to have 1 foot of design flood elevation or freeboard on top of it. But those maps are on our website, and Hillsborough County has now updated the maps for the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County on their webpage.
Where is the best place to start for Citrus County regulations?
Citrus County regulations on flood, I would go directly to Citrus County, type in the word flood regulations, and they should have their flood regulation ordinance for their county on their webpage. That is a requirement of their participation in the NFIP. So their regulation should be. If not, you can email me and I can look up who the flood administrator is for Citrus County, and I can replay that information to you. That way you can have it.
When will Hillsborough County incorporate similar same requirements?
Hillsborough County has started their flood mitigation ordinance. They are quite a ways behind us. Our ordinance is very similar to Pinellas County. Lisa Foster's the administrator over there. And the one thing that the city of Tampa has been trying to do is become similar to our surrounding jurisdictions so that everyone kind of plays by the same rules or have the same feel of their websites, the ordinances. Hillsborough County does have a new ordinance. It would be on their webpage. They were on the borderline of getting in trouble with FEMA because they had not adopted theirs by the time their maps were available to them in October. But I do believe their ordinances have already been passed and they should be on their Hillsborough County flood page.
What is the threshold for existing buildings for full compliance?
Thresholds for existing buildings that are below the design flood elevation is 50% of the tax assessors, of an appraised value, depreciated value of the structure, or it is 60% of the tax assessor's depreciated value. The reason we use 60% on the Hillsborough County tax assessors is because historically Hillsborough County's values for tax purposes are lower than what the property actually is. So we're using a 60% on tax assessor's web and 60 on a private appraisal. Excuse me.
Is City of Tampa freeboard or finished floor more than FBC?
The City of Tampa's freeboard is not any different than the Florida Building Code. To answer the question on that, the Florida Building Code governs ours, and the state of Florida, we are consistent with that requirement. We could, by local ordinance, increase that, but with the new maps and the heights that they are at today, I don't think I wanted to be the person to try to go to 2 or 3 foot above base flood to create a new elevation. So we stayed with the Florida Building Code of 1 foot. Any other questions?
The new AE limit line passes through the front yard, but away the actual construction. Is the construction considered AE for insurance?
How you determine, the question was, if the AE line cuts across the property, here's how the city interprets requirements on flood designation. Insurances are a little different. The city of Tampa considers any part of a structure that touches a flood line, whether it's a velocity zone, whether it's a coastal A or an AE, whichever line is more strict that structure touches, that's the zone that structure is in and has to be compliant with. In insurance writing, they will do the same. I have heard horror stories that the structure is not in an AE zone, but the AE zone cuts across the front of the property. So that part is in an X, part is in an A. Some of that you would have to provide survey to your insurance company to prove that the structure itself is not in a special flood hazard area. And then your flood insurance could be removed, or the requirement for thereof, if it is not within that special flood hazard. We've got about 5 minutes left, I believe, Dawn.
What are the wood treatment requirements for pre-engineered floor trusses and framing?
For requirements, the question is what type of wood for floor framing and truss work. If those areas are below the design flood elevation, those structural elements are within that graph that we gave you for wood products on being treated. Simple yellow pine lumber that you would get from a truss manufacturer would not be flood resistant material and allowed below the design flood elevation. And they certainly could not be if they were in a coastal A or velocity zone, because those are historical or structural members, and those structural members have to be above the design flood elevation.
Height above zoning height, 35-foot height.
Oh, structural height measurement by our local ordinance and zoning. We just changed that to be coinciding with our ordinance in March, because we knew that these elevations for the design flood elevation were in some areas going up 7 feet. That we changed the reading of how you measure from the required finished floor 35 feet to the tallest part of the roof structure. Now remember, that is the required elevation, not your chosen elevation. You can choose to make the structure higher, but we will measure from that design flood elevation, whatever that number is, vertically to the highest peak, and it must meet the 35-foot heights.
And VE is not floor.
Hmm?
VE, who's asking about VE?
On a VE, is to your required elevation is to your structural members, whether that's your lowest beam, structural beam, horizontal beam. That is your design flood elevation point that you start your measurement from. Even though you may have 2 or 3 feet before the finished floor, in a VE or a coastal lay, it's measured from the design flood elevation for your structural members. I think that puts us almost out of time. Let me give you, if you have pencils and papers ready, let me give you my email address if you've got questions or you want to bring something to me. It is Dave, D-A-V-E, .Jennings, Jennings, at tampagov.net. And I'll send that my email address along with the presentation to Dawn and to Eli so that it can get out to you guys. And if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate. We're in the business of helping. We may be regulators, but we also can give some options that you can entertain to see what you want to do and how you want to build and spread that to your clients. So, I think we're pretty much out of time. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate your participation. And again, have a great day and thank you for your time.
It's Peter. Thank you both for the presentation. I know this was great for the entire community here. So thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Turn them on.